You think you're being kind. You tell yourself that keeping the peace, avoiding conflict, swallowing your anger and always being agreeable is a sign of maturity, maybe even spiritual growth. You say yes when you mean no. You smile when you feel disrespected. You nod along with opinions that make your stomach turn, because you believe silence is noble. But what if that isn't kindness at all? What if it's self-betrayal? Carl Jung didn't hesitate to name this pattern for what it is. Not virtue, not goodness, but psychological dysfunction, a form of cowardice rooted in fear. A persona so inflated that it has eclipsed the person you actually are. And before you shut this off, pause. If you've lived your life trying to be the good one, the helpful one, the dependable one, the person who's always available, never difficult, never too much, then this isn't just another video. This is a wake-up call. Jung didn't admire people who were simply nice. In fact, he warned us about them. He believed compulsive niceness is one of the most dangerous psychological traps we fall into. Not because it's evil, but because it's false. When you constantly present a version of yourself that is soft, agreeable, and easy to digest, you're not being virtuous, you're performing. And the longer you perform, the more distant you become from your real self. Jung called this mask the persona, the social role we adopt to meet the expectations of the world. A costume we wear to function, to belong, to survive. The danger begins when you forget it's a costume. And if we're honest, many of you already have. You believe tolerating disrespect without reacting is strength. You believe hiding your anger makes you evolved. You believe abandoning your needs for others makes you generous. But what if it's all driven by fear? Fear of rejection, fear of being disliked, fear of being labelled selfish, rude, or difficult. What if your niceness is not a moral choice, but a defense mechanism? A strategy you learned early in life to stay safe, in an environment where authenticity came at a cost. Because here's the truth Jung was very clear about. Every time you suppress anger to avoid conflict, every time you fake agreement to keep the peace, every time you smile while resentment builds inside you, you are feeding your shadow. Those emotions don't disappear, they're pushed underground, and there they grow stronger, until they emerge as burnout, depression, psychosomatic illness, toxic relationships, or sudden, explosive rage. Jung warned that when the persona becomes your entire identity, you lose contact with the self. You become a ghost in your own life. Moving through rooms with polite smiles and dead eyes, praised by everyone, yet strangely empty. So let me ask you something honestly. Are you truly kind? Or are you afraid? Because real kindness isn't about never saying no. It isn't about being universally liked. It isn't about erasing yourself for the comfort of others. Real kindness has teeth. It can say, stop. It can disappoint. It can walk away. It can confront. Jung didn't want you to be pleasant. He wanted you to be real. And that's what this video is about. Not how to be liked, but how to be whole. Not how to be nice, but how to be free. This may be the most uncomfortable truth you've heard in a long time. If you've ever wondered why social interactions leave you exhausted, why praise feels hollow, or why your life feels strangely disconnected from who you actually are, Jung would point to one central problem: who you actually are. Jung would point to one central problem. Your persona has taken over your soul. In Jungian psychology, the persona itself isn't evil, it's necessary. Without it, society couldn't function. But Jung issued a stark warning. The moment you identify with the persona, the moment you believe the mask is who you are, you begin a slow, psychological death. And the nice person is the clearest example. Your persona revolves around one obsession: approval. You learned early that being agreeable kept you safe. Maybe anger was punished. Maybe disagreement led to abandonment. Maybe being good was the only way you received love. So you adapted. You became polite, understanding, flexible, the one who never causes trouble. And over time, this wasn't just something you did, it became who you thought you were. But Jung would say this clearly: what you call kindness is often an inflated persona, a performance exaggerated far beyond its healthy function. You're not nice because you freely choose to be. You're nice because you're terrified of what would happen if you weren't, terrified of disapproval, terrified of rejection, terrified of being seen as bad. And the psychological cost of this fear is enormous. When you live entirely through a persona, your authentic self doesn't disappear, it gets buried. You stop asking what you feel, what you want, what you believe. You adapt so automatically to others that you lose all internal reference points. Jung described this as the ego becoming fused with the persona. You no longer know who you are behind the mask. That's why so many nice people feel empty, why praise never satisfies, why approval feels strangely meaningless. Because it's not you being approved, it's the performance. And the more you invest in that performance, the more fragile your identity becomes. Any criticism feels like annihilation. Any disapproval feels unbearable. Jung warned that this leads to neurosis, not because you're weak, but because you're divided. One part of you is calm, patient, saintly. Another part is furious, exhausted, and starving for honesty. And the longer that split continues, the more violent the inner tension becomes. That's when people start saying, "I don't know who I am anymore. I feel like I'm living someone else's life. I did everything right, but I feel dead inside." That isn't random depression. It's the consequence of living behind a mask for too long. And now we arrive at the most dangerous part, the part most people never see coming. Everything you refuse to live consciously doesn't vanish. It sinks. It gathers force, and it becomes what Jung called the shadow. This is why nice people often carry the darkest shadows of all. There's a comforting myth that nice people are harmless, that politeness and agreeableness mean there's no danger beneath the surface. Jung strongly disagreed. The shadow is everything you reject in yourself. Your anger, selfishness, envy, sexual energy, pride, need for power, capacity to say no. Not because these things are evil, but because you were taught they were. So you buried them. But as Jung warned again and again, what you resist doesn't disappear, it grows. Every time you feel violated and smile anyway, every time you say, "It's fine," when it isn't, every time you betray your boundaries to maintain harmony, you teach your unconscious that your truth is unacceptable. The shadow remembers, and when it finally breaks through, it doesn't do so gently. That's why the calmest people sometimes explode, why the most helpful collapse in burnout, why good people sabotage relationships or fall into depression without understanding why. By trying to be good all the time, you become dangerous, not to others, but to yourself. Because your darkness is unconscious, unintegrated, and leaking out sideways through resentment, guilt, passive aggression, and exhaustion. Jung didn't believe the solution was being more moral. He believed the solution was becoming conscious, integration, owning your darkness so it stops owning you. And this is where things become even more uncomfortable. Because compulsive niceness isn't just self-protection, it's control. Your niceness often hides an unspoken contract. If I'm good enough, you won't leave. That isn't love, it's a transaction. You're not giving freely, you're investing. And when the return doesn't come, resentment follows. Jung would call this unconscious manipulation, the shadow wearing a halo. And the cost is devastating. Your body eventually speaks through tension and illness. Your psyche speaks through numbness and despair. Your relationships become hollow and one-sided. Worst of all, intimacy dies. Because people can only love you to the extent that they know you. And if all they ever meet is your mask, no one ever truly meets you. So ask yourself, do you want to be liked, or do you want to be known? Jung's answer was individuation, the integration of the whole self, including anger. Because anger isn't a flaw, it's information. It signals that a boundary has been crossed, that something sacred in you matters. Reclaiming anger isn't becoming cruel, it's becoming honest. It's learning to listen before the emotion turns toxic. And this is where change begins, not by ripping off the mask overnight, but by choosing, moment by moment, to be real instead of safe. You will lose approval. You will disappoint people. You will grieve the identity that kept you protected. But what you gain is immeasurable. Clarity, energy, self-respect, a life that actually feels like yours. Jung didn't call this perfection. He called it wholeness. So if you've lived afraid of conflict, addicted to approval, let this be the moment you stop being nice and start being true. And I want to hear from you. What part of yourself have you been hiding to be liked? Leave it in the comments, not for approval, but as the first act of honesty. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe.